It can be very difficult to get out of the web of lies, betrayal, and deception. Today's story is the confession of a cheater. Let's listen to her.
As an assiduous and hardworking person, I always prioritized my career. I had a successful job, a pleasant apartment, and a tight-knit group of friends. I felt like there was a void in my life. Eventually, I took a leap of faith and decided to give online dating a try, despite the scary tales of encountering peculiar and questionable individuals on the internet. Despite a few unsuccessful dates, I was determined to take a chance. While browsing profiles, I stumbled upon John's page and he seemed to fit the bill. He was friendly, clever, and ambitious, everything I was looking for. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, and before I knew it, we were talking every day. After a few weeks, we decided to meet in person. I remember our first meeting vividly. It was as if we had known each other for years. From the moment I laid eyes on him, I knew he was the one. Our connection was immediate, and our first date turned into a marathon talk that lasted until the early hours of the morning. From that point on, we were inseparable. We explored new places, shared our goals and aspirations, and dreamed about our future together. It didn't take long for us to realize we wanted to spend the rest of our lives together. During a romantic weekend getaway, John proposed to me, and 6 months later we exchanged vows in a magnificent ceremony surrounded by our loved ones. Our wedding day was nothing short of perfection, and it only confirmed what we already knew deep down, that we were meant to be together. John and I built a life full of love, laughter, and adventure. Despite our busy work schedules, we always made time for each other. We traveled the world, tried new things, and supported each other through life's highs and lows. Our marriage wasn't without its challenges, but we faced them with grace and an unwavering love for each other. Our relationship was built on a foundation of open and honest communication, and we always prioritized our love for each other. John is not only my soulmate, but also my lifelong partner, and I am thankful for the love we share every day. However, my world started to crumble before my eyes, and it all began with a seemingly simple case. As a successful lawyer with a reputation for working with high-profile clients, I was accustomed to dealing with wealthy and influential individuals. He was one of those clients, a charming businessman with an infectious smile. Despite knowing it was wrong, I was inexplicably drawn to him from the moment we met. I remember our first encounter like it was yesterday. I was in my office poring over legal documents and preparing for a major case when my assistant announced over the intercom that a new client had arrived and was waiting in the lobby. As I made my way down the hallway to the reception room, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. I had heard whispers about this particular client, a wealthy businessman with ties to some of the most influential people in the city. Renowned for his charm and willingness to do whatever it takes to get what he wants, he was a force to be reckoned with. As I stepped into the lobby, there he was, tall, commanding, and exuding confidence, with a smile that could light up the entire room. The moment he extended his hand and introduced himself, I felt a jolt of electricity run through my body. Despite my best efforts to remain professional, I couldn't help but feel drawn to him. There was a magnetic quality to him that I couldn't resist. Perhaps it was the intensity of his gaze or the smooth timbre of his voice. But I knew from the start that I was in perilous territory. As we collaborated on the case, my attraction to him only grew stronger. We discussed the details over drinks and dinner, and I found myself captivated by his intellect and humor. He had a way of making me feel cherished with his words and gestures, and I couldn't help but respond to his advances. Despite my reservations, I found myself falling for him against my better judgment. I was a highly regarded and respected lawyer, and he was just another affluent client. Despite my better judgment, I found myself unable to resist his charm. I knew that our connection could jeopardize my professional reputation, but I couldn't stay away. It was like playing with fire. I was aware of the risks, but I couldn't help myself. I was addicted to the thrill of our secret romance, and he was like a drug to me. I was swept up in the intensity of our affair, and in the beginning, he was incredibly attentive, checking in with me frequently via text and phone calls. Without any prompting, he seemed to intuitively understand my desires, which I found delightful. It was as if he possessed the ability to read my mind. He took me on extravagant outings, showered me with opulent presents, and professed his love for me. It felt surreal, and I couldn't believe how fortunate I was. I, a prosperous lawyer, had captured the heart of one of the most desirable bachelors in the city. But as time elapsed, I began to discover a more sinister aspect of our connection. He would suddenly transform into a distant and detached individual, disregarding my calls and messages for days on end. I'd be left in a state of confusion, desperately attempting to rekindle his interest. Just as rapidly as he vanished, he would reemerge, showering me with presents and affection as if nothing had happened. It appeared as if he was engaged in a dangerous and manipulative game, one that I was beginning to comprehend. Despite multiple attempts to terminate our relationship, I found myself unable to break free from his grasp. Despite my efforts to end things, he always found a way to reel me back in. His apologies and declarations of not being able to live without me were too convincing, and I fell for them every time. He had an uncanny ability to manipulate me, and I was powerless to stop him. As my relationship with my client grew more intense, I found myself neglecting my spouse at home. I'd arrive home late from work, too exhausted to engage in conversation, and spend most of my evenings texting and communicating with my lover. His thoughts consumed me, and I found myself constantly checking my phone for messages and searching for opportunities to be with him. I'd cancel plans with my spouse, claiming that I had to work late or was unwell just to be with my paramour. As time went on, I started to feel remorseful about my behavior. I knew that I was ignoring my husband, yet I couldn't help myself. I was addicted to the thrill of my affair and didn't know how to break free from it. Naturally, my spouse noticed that something was amiss. He'd inquire if I was all right and if there was anything he could do to help. But I pushed him away. I couldn't bring myself to confess the truth that I was having an affair with one of my clients. Instead, I became more distant and unapproachable, avoiding him at all costs and reacting angrily whenever he tried to talk to me. I was furious with myself for hurting him, but I couldn't seem to control my actions. As my relationship with my client intensified, my husband started to distance himself from me. He had always been a hard-working individual, running his own plastic manufacturing plant, but now he appeared to be pouring himself into his work with even more determination. He'd leave the house early in the morning and return late at night, barely acknowledging my existence. When we did communicate, it was usually about his business, and he didn't seem to listen to anything I said. Initially, I was too wrapped up in my own affair to perceive the alterations in my husband's demeanor. As time went by, I grew more and more desolate and isolated. I made an effort to discuss our problems with my spouse, but he didn't seem to care about anything except his business. I became resentful that I had to vie for his attention with his job. As my relationship with my client started to crumble, I finally comprehended the extent of the damage I had inflicted on my marriage. While I knew that I had been neglecting my husband, I was unaware of the extent of his anguish. I also chose not to shun my lover because I was becoming more and more enamored with his company. As my affair with my client evolved, I realized that he was becoming more intrigued by my husband's plastic manufacturing plant. In the beginning, he would casually pose a few questions about the business, but he soon escalated to more probing and detailed inquiries. I felt uneasy about the extent of his curiosity, but I didn't want to endanger our relationship, so I tried my best to provide him with answers. He displayed a keen interest in the company's finances, delving into topics such as revenue, expenses, and future projections. At first, I attempted to dismiss his questions and avoid the subject altogether. My lover wouldn't take no for an answer, and he started to apply more pressure on me to divulge business details. He used his charm and power to convince me that he had good intentions and was only attempting to assist me and my spouse. As my relationship with my client deepened, I began to comprehend that his fascination with my husband's plastic manufacturing plant went beyond merely acquiring insider knowledge. He had much grander aspirations. While sitting in his lavish office one day, he flashed a sly grin and proposed, "What if we purchased the factory jointly?" The idea caught me off guard, and I asked, "What do you mean?" He clarified, "Let's combine our assets, acquire your husband's share of the factory, and transform it into a lucrative business. We could become business partners." Though skeptical, I couldn't help but wonder why my husband would sell his portion to us. My lover shook his head, pointing out that this offer was excellent and said that we have the potential to turn the factory into a very profitable enterprise. I was aware that my husband, who had built the factory from scratch, was deeply invested in its success, and he would never sell his shares, particularly to my client. Despite this, my client was persuasive, envisioning a prosperous future where we would become unstoppable partners, and the factory would be the crown jewel of our business empire. This left me in a quandary, as the prospect of financial success and accomplishment was tempting. I couldn't ignore the fact that my husband would be devastated if we acquired his factory without his knowledge. Despite this, I ultimately decided to side with my client and purchase the factory. The temptation of financial gain and my loyalty to my client proved to be stronger than my fidelity to my husband. It was difficult to reject my client's offer to acquire my husband's shares in the plastics factory, but his persistence and well-thought-out plan convinced me to follow through. After extensive deliberation, we eventually devised a strategy. My client proposed making the initial move by offering a substantial amount of money to purchase my husband's share in the factory. We hoped that this would initiate discussions, and the sizable sum of money on the table would entice my husband to consider the offer. My client proceeded to approach my husband with the proposal, which initially piqued his interest. My client offered a generous sum of money, and it was evident that my spouse was contemplating the proposal. Despite his initial interest, my husband remained cautious and requested additional time to evaluate the proposal. As time passed, I sensed that my spouse was becoming increasingly apprehensive about the deal. He had devoted years of his life to constructing the factory from scratch and was deeply committed to its triumph. Selling his stake to a stranger was not a decision he took lightly. Ultimately, my husband made a choice. He contacted my client and conveyed that while he was grateful for the offer, he was unwilling to part with his share in the factory. Upon our reunion, my client exuded dissatisfaction and irritation. I was deeply saddened by his despair regarding my husband's choice not to sell the plant to him. My heart ached for his situation, and I resolved to attempt to persuade my spouse to sell the property. I was fully aware that this was a risky proposition. My husband had invested his heart and soul into the enterprise, which brought him immense happiness and fulfillment. I couldn't ignore the feeling that this opportunity was too valuable to let slip away. As a result, I went back home, determined to convince my husband to entertain the offer. Unfortunately, my efforts were met with resistance. My husband was immediately skeptical and began asking questions about the source of the offer and how I had come across it. I tried to evade his inquiries, but he could sense that I was withholding information. In truth, I had suggested my customer consider my husband's factory. I'd only intended to suggest a promising investment opportunity to my customer, but I never imagined it would escalate to this extent. Faced with my husband's suspicions, I was hesitant to come clean about my involvement. Instead, I tried to persuade him that selling the plant would be in our best interest. I emphasized the financial benefits, the chance to pursue new ventures, and the escape from the daily grind. However, my husband remained resolute in his decision not to sell. He explained that the factory was an integral part of his identity and he couldn't let it go. My plan had backfired, and I could sense the tension between us mounting. My husband's doubts only exacerbated the situation, and I sensed that he was distancing himself from me. After a prolonged period of silence, I finally realized my mistake. My husband acted as though everything was fine, which only added to my confusion. And to my surprise, my husband arranged for my client to meet with a stranger who posed as the owner of the land where the factory was built. The imposter offered to sell the property for a significant sum of money. The opportunity seemed too good to pass up, a chance to acquire the property we had been eyeing for a while. When my husband presented his new plan, I was taken aback. He proposed to fabricate an owner of the land where the factory stood. The fictitious owner would then meet with my client and offer to sell the property for a substantial amount. Upon my client's arrival, he informed me of encountering a stranger who professed to be the proprietor of the land where the factory stood. The stranger expressed a keen interest in selling the land at a substantial price. To deceive my client into believing that he could obtain the land, my spouse developed a plan to pose as the landowner. He exaggerated the value of the property and portrayed it as a rare opportunity that could not be missed. As a result, my customer became highly interested. He consented to trade the plant for the land, and it all seemed too good to be true. We thought we had pulled off the ultimate con and were on the verge of owning a lucrative plastics manufacturing facility. However, we were unaware that our plan was about to fail spectacularly. The client went to meet the person who had given him a counterfeit document in exchange for the required money. My lover was unaware until he handed me the documents for verification of their authenticity. After examining them, I realized that they were fraudulent, and the individual who provided them was nowhere to be found. As time went on, I found myself entangled in a web of deceit and treachery. To make matters worse, my husband had discovered my affair with a lover and became even more suspicious when he learned of our plan to purchase the plant. He took matters into his own hands, and the outcome was catastrophic. The customer barged into my office, accusing me of being part of a scheme to deceive him. I attempted to assure him that I was unaware of my husband's plans, but he remained skeptical. He insisted on pressing charges, and I found myself arrested and awaiting trial. It was a humiliating experience, and I felt like my entire world was crumbling around me. My reputation as a successful lawyer was in ruins, and my personal life was in disarray. I was on the brink of being sent to prison, and my spouse had handed me divorce papers stating that he could no longer trust or be with me. As the trial continued, the truth came to light, revealing that my client had deceived me. My customer had been searching for a way to purchase the factory, and my spouse had taken advantage of this to trap him. I was caught in the middle, and my life was shattered as a result. Even though I was ultimately exonerated of all charges, the damage was already done. My profession, status, and marriage were all destroyed, leaving me to pick up the pieces of my shattered life, pondering how everything had gone so awry. I came to the realization that I was trapped in an abusive cycle. He was manipulating my emotions and desires to obtain what he wanted, utilizing his power and wealth. It wasn't until I witnessed him exploiting our affair to his advantage that I recognized how perilous he was. This realization came too late. The damage had been done, and I was left to pick up the broken fragments of my life. My relationship with my client had led me down a treacherous path, and I had paid the ultimate price for my foolishness.